Okay. Balance, measure, economy, and appropriateness. I like that. So let's just enjoy that for a minute before we plunge into the ouch, cringe, vomit that the Enneagram dishes up so liberally. So today we're looking at a trauma-informed view of Enneagram Type 4. And there were a couple of questions that I said I wanted to explore. I'm not going to do them step by step by step. And I also first want to give an orientation to the way that I work with the Enneagram and the way that I work with type from a trauma-informed perspective, which is slightly different to a lot of approaches. And the reason I put this map up here is because I use Tom Condon's metaphor that the Enneagram is a map of maps. And each of us have a map that is partially informed by the neurobiological foundations of our temperament. And Saleh is here, who's a multi-book author on affective neurobiology and the Enneagram, including the instincts and the subtypes. And how we process our feelings is part of what determines our type. And then our conditioning determines what John Vervaeke, the cognitive science, calls a salience landscape. So each of our different maps focuses on different features of reality. And we select certain features and we over-select for certain features. So the map that I chose for Enneagram 6 is a map of flooding risks. And the map that I chose for Enneagram 8 is very, very realistic. And I think of it as the right kind of map to use if you want to start a military invasion of somewhere. And I mean, I'm joking, obviously. And then the Enneagram 4 map is very aesthetic. It's very beautiful. It's very refined and sensitive. But as you can see, it's not going to get you anywhere very, very fast if you compare it to the Enneagram 3 map, which is as efficient as possible and not much love of beauty and taking one's time built in there. So this is a metaphor that I find very, very helpful. But what we do in trauma-informed work is try and understand, why do I have this map? Why am I so busy selecting for that stuff? And why am I avoiding other stuff? Why is it just completely irrelevant to me and even threatening? So we're going to take a look at some of this stuff. The questions that I put in my email and the WhatsApp on the Enneagram Learning Community were things that concern me about types, and these are my questions about type 4. So this question of the anti-self actions as defensive strategies in Echazo, he gives self-controlling as an anti-self action for Enneagram 4. I want to explore a little bit about what that all means. And then this idea of crafting a special identity as a compensation for the specific childhood pattern and heart wound of 7, and how is envy caused by misattunement and emotional neglect? How do we work with 4s? And here my particular question, and this is very much informed by trauma studies, is how do we get people to come and inhabit the here and now in their body and with us relationally in the present moment? And with Enneagram 4s, that's really what they're trying to avoid most, because the here and now is where our suffering is. The here and now in relationship is where our shame is. And for all of us, this is the big task. The big healing journey is to become present to ourselves and present to what is in a way that we're not resisting or fleeing or hiding or, trying to over-control what's going on to defend ourselves. So working with 4s to invite them into that relational space with us. And then one of the things that I find quite funny with people that I supervise who coaching fours is that they love it when the four opens up and goes into their childhood pain, and they think, wow, I'm doing a really great job. And fours do a lot of self-disclosing, self-analysis in the room and almost impress the coach or the therapist with their level of self-awareness. And it's a trap. It's a trap, basically. So if you think, wow, I'm doing a great job, you've probably down the rabbit hole with your Enneagram 4 client, and they're loving it because they're managing to still stay safe within their strategy. They're staying safe within the analytical mentation that they're busy with, and you're probably not really getting very far very fast. Okay, so, but first, you know how I like to work. Those of you who study with me, those of you who come on my programs, I want to start with a resourcing exercise. And I don't know if you can see the side of the screen because I've got the gallery view. Can you see the whole slide? Yeah, okay. So I like to start everything with resourcing because it helps us to ground in the here and now. It helps us to become present and to feel like we can cope with being ourselves, which is largely what our ego defensive strategies are in place for, is to help us cope with ourselves and our unconscious suffering or our conscious suffering. So resourcing practices allow us to build up an inner sense of I'm here and I can hold my experience. And there's some aspects of me in my life that feel pretty okay or that I can draw on. So I'm going to ask you to reflect here. Take an inventory of some of the resources in your life at the moment. External relationship resources and internal resources. And here I put in relationship a tree because it doesn't have to be a person. And external resources can be literally anything. And for me, it is baby donkeys. You will see my internet search history is baby donkeys for days because they make me feel really happy. So they're a resource. And then an internal resource might be a personal quality. It might be something that you experience internally. It might be the soles of your feet that connect you with the feeling of solidity, or your breath as an internal resource. So I just invite you to take a minute to think of one or two at least in each category. Okay. So I'm going to, okay, it looks like everyone's still writing. Let me give you another minute. Okay, I'm going to ask a 4 to tell me, if they would, how it feels right now to have done this exercise. How are you feeling in your body in the here and now? Can I just ask you, Petra, if you don't mind? And I'm sorry for outing you, but
That's all right. I'm happy to out myself. How I feel doing this. It's a very familiar thing, so it feels familiar and safe. And whenever I do this kind of thing, there's like a sense of upliftment, a sense of, that sort of gentle joy, like that gentle smile on the inside.
Lovely. And is there a somatic sensation that goes along with that?
yeah, there's like warmth in my body. There's that sense of energetically, there's something that's moving me up into this area in my body.
This area here.
Yeah, sort of from I mean, it's funny because as I'm saying it, I'm thinking, well, I'm also feeling my legs, so it's not like I'm floating, but there's a feeling of there's a lot of energy in the chest and in the arms and in the hands.
Okay, wow.
And for me, like joy or upliftment has that kind of opening quality. So there's up and open.
Up and open. Thank you. As you say that, I think probably everyone can access some of that feeling. Thank you. And are there practices that you use regularly to resource yourself, particularly when you're grappling with some of the four? I know you use the word story, whatever metaphor you use when you're grappling with yourself. What is a resourcing practice that really works for you?
I think my primary one is movement of any kind, walking, dancing, exercise, preferably being outside. So I mean, walking is like ideal because it gives me both a connection to the non-human world, the trees, the birds, the animals, and it gives me the connection to that physical engagement of the body. And quite literally, sometimes I think it's this thing of having more sky and having more, having that broader perspective by being outside rather than being in an enclosed space and being maybe in front of a screen or being with myself, where there might be this kind of closing down. Being outside is instantly, particularly where I live, I mean, there is a lot of space and sky. So for me, that's an important part of it, I think.
That's so interesting, the difference between in by yourself and closed down and out and big and sky and open. I'm kind of curious, just as you're speaking, like, what are the resistances that you have to overcome and how to doing your resource practice? Because I know for me as my type, I know what's good for me, but to cross the threshold from knowing to doing, I don't know if you have that challenge of a resistance to doing what's good for you.
I think one of my strategies of dealing with that is so for example, with the walking, I'm very clear with myself that I walk almost every day. If I don't walk in the morning, then I'll walk in the late afternoon, but it has to fit in somewhere. So that when I wake up, when I'm feeling, oh God, I can't get up, I can't get out of bed, I'm feeling depressed or whatever, there's this thing of like, but I've already committed to doing this. So yes, I can skip it in the morning, but I know I'll do it in the afternoon. And also because I mostly do it in the mornings and I mostly do it every day, there's enough momentum behind me that I don't have to make a decision, that I've already decided I'm going to do it. And so it's easier to step into it. That's one strategy. And then I think the other strategy is that thing of, I don't know, some time ago, quite a few years ago, I decided that, okay, so I know that movement is what works best for me, that each day I will do something. And I don't set a time or an expectation of what that has to look like, but I know that every day I will do some kind of movement. So some days I will do a lot of movement. I will dance and walk and do exercise and swim. And some days it's just like, okay, well, I've done a 5-minute, I've put one song on and I've danced for 5 minutes, or I've gone around the block once, or, I've done 3 different exercises. And it's kind of that thing of taking away the pressure of it having to look a certain way, having to have a certain form, or having to have a certain length to count. It's just like, okay, I know it needs to be in my day in whatever way, shape or form.
So it sounds like that the momentum helps with the kind of, it sounds almost like a dedication, conscientious, this is what I'm doing, and creating that not negotiability about it sounds helpful.
Yeah, I mean, like the way I imagine it sometimes, it's like, imagine if you're in a body of water, whether that's a swimming pool or a lake or something, and you walk around it, around the edge of it, the same direction. the more you walk it, the more there's also a momentum that pushes you, that the water
Yes,
behind you. But if you only do one lap and then you go like, oh, maybe I'll find another place where it's easier to walk, you miss out on that momentum that comes from the repetition, you know.
I like that metaphor because it's got the flow and the emotion, that it's not a mechanical metaphor. And I also find what you're saying helpful about a commitment that has a certain quality to it of, I'm going to move, I'm going to do some kind of movement practice, but giving yourself the freedom to be creative or maybe a bit impulsive, or, see what you really feel like, rather than kind of using some, for me, the alternative would be a kind of rigid superego, quite self-punishing approach, rather than an approach that's life-oriented and feels good, like you're led by what feels good. And that for me stands out, because I think it's very difficult for fours to allow themselves to feel good often. In my experience and with my four feeling style, it's like, am I even allowed? I don't know if you relate to that piece.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking about that as I was just out before this call, and I was out at a friend's farm. We were doing some farming with other people. I was feeling good, but then as I left there, I noticed I was feeling quite low in energy and a little bit like overwhelmed with some stuff in my life. And I was thinking about it, and I was noticing that shift of my state. And then in one moment, I caught myself and I was like, oh, but that's so interesting that I'm now completely going into that when I've just had a beautiful time. I could also focus there. But how easy it is for me, and I don't know if that's to do with the four or just with that particular state I'm in at the moment, but it's like, there is almost like I could be going further along that road of goodness, but over there I can see something that's on the horizon that's not so nice. So let me go and investigate there and dig deep there
Oh
because it's
no, yes, exactly. And that's the thing that I put on this little collage that I made for my posters about four. If you look at the top right here, it's this thing of, I'm going along and suddenly boom, down a hole. And that, for me, to be able to catch oneself there and to notice, where has my mind gone? Where have my thoughts gone? What loop of the past or the future or self-analysis or some self-comparison or some story that I've fallen into in that moment? And to be able to, with there's this philosopher, a guy called Stanovich. He calls it cognitive decoupling, where you actually notice your thoughts as thoughts, and you're able to notice, not judge or whatever, but just to say, I can take my awareness from that huge thought loop that goes into all the things and say, no, I'm putting it here. Well, for me, the mind, bringing the mind to the heart, the body, what's here, the light, I suppose all the other things that you were saying, the beautiful day that you've had, that it's that noticing that helps you to shift.
Yeah, and then in a way, it's like that exercise that we just did with the resourcing. It's like a mini practice one can do at any point. I mean, in polyvagal practice, you do this. You call it anchors, like ventral anchors, and it's kind of about identifying who, when, what as an activity, and where. What are the places where I feel connected and resourced, where I feel good? Who are the people with whom I feel that, or the other beings? My cat, or a
Exactly.
donkey. What activities
Exactly.
give me that feeling, and when? And it could be like a time of day,
Yes.
like that first thing in the morning when the light's beautiful and it's all quiet, or last thing at night when I'm lying in my bed, or or when in
Yes.
my life on a bigger scale, or when in the seasons, or
Yes.
day of the week, any kind of when, but to really, like we did at the beginning, to identify those regularly, and as we revisit those places more and more regularly, they become stronger resources. So for example,
That's it.
with my cat, so since he's been around, I really notice how good he is for me and for my nervous system. And so often when I'm doing these little practices, I think of him, and the more I think of him, the easier the
Yes.
pathway there becomes, and the more detailed is the
Exactly.
picture and the feeling of that connection between us, and how much that uplifts me. And it's so, it's kind of like generating again its own momentum, like that thing with the water, right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is thank you so much, because you're providing such powerful and helpful teaching around this, the kind of antidote to despair, melancholy, anxiety, all of the things in the Enneagram that are our traps and our fixations that take us out of feeling basically okay in the here and now in ourselves. And sometimes it feels like such a struggle to feel okay, and we're wrestling and we're doing things and we're striving, and we don't even know that we're doing it to try and feel okay. And then when we have 5 minutes of okayness, that we have a reprieve from the compulsion of our ego strategy, there's this immense easing and relaxation of the strategy. And the more that we can experience that as real, the sense of a fundamental okayness, that I'm okay right now. I don't need to strive. I don't need to impress anyone. I don't need to rush through my to-do list. I don't need to, get someone to deliver that thing that they said, or whatever it is. I could go around the Enneagram dramatizing each point. But what you're saying about the more you do it, the stronger it gets is so, so powerful. And that's in doing this trauma-informed work, in doing work using polyvagal theory, somatic psychology, it's such a shift from analyzing ourselves using the Enneagram and thinking about, no, that must be my line to two, or is that my wing, or no, nothing like that. It's about, let me take my mind and use the power of my awareness, and Russ Hudson says, all spiritual work is the training of awareness. So who makes me feel good? Around whom and with whom do I feel at ease and good? And even just thinking about them suddenly eases our heart. And maybe makes us smile a little bit when we think, whether it's a person or a tree or a dog or a donkey or a cat, that there are relationships that ease our being and relax our nervous system, where we feel really safe and helped and cared for. And even if we only have one relationship like that with the cat, that's a resource. And then the when. Yes, when and doing what? When do I feel at ease? What's good for me? And I think this is for me, the definition of self-love is not at all what I used to think it is. And it's not a meme. It's do I know what's good for me? And do I care about my own inner state? And in the Egypt work I'm doing with Robert, do I know myself in my heart well enough to know how to look after my own heart, to look after my being, to care for myself in a way that I know I'm living well? And I don't know if any of that resonates with you, but that self-love is this. It's resourcing ourselves, it's healing.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying there, for me, there's something in there about, and I think maybe this has become clearer to me through doing the Enneagram work with you. It's like the possibility not getting lost in the feeling stories, and to go to what you just called it, self-care or self-love, of going, okay, I feel like that, but what is it that I need to do? Or what is it that I can do?
Yes.
Because I think my tendency is otherwise to just wallow in the story and the feelings and oh, everything is so terrible.
Yeah.
It spins out of control.
Yes.
And I guess this is the beautiful thing that you were just talking about as well, is this, that it's not about, this kind of work is not about changing the story or working with the story or even going into the story, but it's about working with the state that we're in. And I mean, in my work, I would say it's, it's the nervous system state, to recognize, oh, I'm now in this state, and to know our nervous system and ourselves well enough to know, okay, when I'm in this state, the things that help me are X, Y, and Z. So let me go and do one of those things, or it's not always doing. Not to kind of, I guess my tendency, and I'm sure it's like a human tendency, and I don't know if it's worse for the fours, but it's like this, the kind of going around the racetrack of my thinking. And in a way, it's the same thoughts again and again and again. It's not really anything new. It's 99%, it's the same territory that I'm racing around.
Yes. That's a very interesting point, the racetrack of round and round, and the same thoughts, going over the same thoughts again and again. One of the things that Condon said, he read some research somewhere, but he says it's that often when we're remembering things, we're not really remembering the thing, we're remembering the last time we remembered it. We're remembering a memory. And so we get into these loops in our head where we relive things again and again, and these memories become vivid and hardwired. And actually, it's quite possible to replace them. It's quite possible to take our awareness somewhere else and to disrupt that circuit and to bring our awareness to something that is life-giving and resourcing and kind of, I like the word wholesome. For me, it's a word that I like for myself, and I don't want it to have any judgmental connotations. It's just, for me, the opposite, I think, between my recklessness in 7 and self-care and wholesomeness. That it's the antidote for me. So yeah, I really love what you're saying about the racetrack and the thinking. And then also recognizing that we do have agency. And that's what goes missing in the 4, is the body center, which is agency. It's the movement center, it's action, it's the ability to move in the world and to change my life and to feel like I can do something with myself and my life, and that I'm a powerful force of goodness in the world, for example. And stepping into one's life with that, well, it's a reconnection with the life force, really, when it comes to agency. So yeah, thank you for that, and I'm grateful for your work that you have done, and how much you've invested in your work as a healer to be able to share that with us. Thank you. And yeah, so taking that with us, the resources, our sense of feeling more resourced, and I invite you in this moment just to notice what the resourcing exercise did for you, what talking about resources did for you, what talking about feeling better did for you, that maybe you've noticed since you've arrived here, there might be a slight shift for you in your state, that maybe you also feel something like what Petra described, maybe whatever state you were in before, maybe there's a new gesture for where you are right now. So that gives you a little bit of a precursor or an insight into what trauma-informed work is about. And this is the first preconception that I like to address, is that it's not about what Bessel van der Kolk calls the archaeological dig, where we want to figure out what's wrong with us and we want to find out how how it happened to us and what's wrong with us. And if we find that out, if we find the kind of or trauma, the original crime scene, that somehow we're going to be free, that's part of the illusion that we go down. So trauma-informed work is about realizing how possible it is to actually feel a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. And that all that thinking, in Buddhist terms, it's samsara. It's chasing after one's identity, or an answer like that. One of the Buddhist teachers said it's like going into a thicket of thorns to try and find yourself. It's not there. Your true sense of self and being and centered experience in yourself, the foundation of awareness, your ability to be at ease with yourself, is not down that road of self-analysis. And I think a lot of psychotherapy, certainly psychotherapy that I've experienced, I've been down that long path for years and years, talking about this event and that trauma and this interpretation, and talking a lot about what's wrong with me, and then realizing, oh, wait a minute, it actually is much more beneficial to do some somatic practices like dancing, like Tai Chi, like yoga, like these kinds of polyvagal practices that alter how we are being in ourselves, how we're walking, how we're standing. Suddenly we feel a bit taller. We feel a sense of strength and nobility and balance that doesn't come from self-analysis. So, yeah, I wanted to start with that, and I'm very grateful. Thanks again, Petra, that we get an insight into how this works for real. It's not a theory. And I just want to touch on a couple of things, other things about how I think about the Enneagram. Why do we work with it? We love it so much and we're so deeply immersed in it that we often don't even think about why we work with it. And my philosophy around it is that we're trying to develop wisdom. And wisdom is, Viveki again calls the recursive application of rationality to the problem of developing a good use of rationality. This all sounds very cognitive, but it's not actually. It's about how do we take our awareness and our ability to think and our ability to reflect, inner witness, Enneagram, and apply it to ourselves to choose how to be wise, to apply our awareness to ourselves in a way that we can choose. And we all know what that's like when, here I've got an example of a conflict situation. When we're able to catch ourselves, and not in the superego police sense, but that thing Petra spoke about is I'm on my way from this beautiful day farming, and I can just imagine the light and the sand and being really physical, and then I'm falling down a hole, and being able to stop and say, wait, what would be the wise response here? I have agency. My type is not baked in. It's not happening to me. My type is a strategy that I deploy. So I might have had very good reasons for going down the depression hole when I was little and withdrawing and going into myself and doing that thing. But right now, do I have to do that? What is the wise response right now? Do I want to go down the hole? Or that's my compulsion is, oh, look what's there. I can go and, think about my torment. What else might be available? Okay, I can stand up and I can look at that light and I can feel my strength and I can feel, wow, I'm so grateful that my legs work. Whatever there is to be grateful about. So there are things that you can choose, and it's about that moment of intervention, using one's awareness. So when I've just given an example here of practice, there's so many. Like you spoke about nature, there's walking, there's dancing, there's art, there's ceremony and ritual. I use a lot of ceremony and ritual. I burn things and I face the directions, and I love that stuff because it puts me in a state of reverence and awe and gratitude. So that's one of mine. But then in a crisis situation, choosing, and I like these 3 doors here from Buddhism. Is it necessary to do the thing? Is it necessary to do my ego strategy right now, which includes mental habits and my various addictions? Is it helpful in the broadest possible sense? And is it kind? And that could be kind to myself, kind to others, kind to my own life, kind to my future. So these are quite broad questions, but these 3 doors for me are so helpful because it helps me to inhibit my immediate, intense, emotionally activated response. And here, I really, Saleh, I'm not going to let this moment pass. You, the neuroaffective, the affective neurobiology, is there anything you can also say about this kind of moment of self-inhibition? I know that there's communication between different parts of the brain. Maybe I'll put up the seagull slide. No, let me not put that up because it's going to make everyone look at it too much. If you can say something about this moment neurologically where we're able to choose.
Where we're able to choose our reactions and not be compulsive by them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So in the brain, the brain consists of a hierarchy. There are primary processes, secondary processes, and tertiary processes. The primary processes exist on a relatively primitive level in the brain, in the midbrain and the limbic system. And then the secondary, these are the things that we are all born with,
Mm-hmm.
our primary emotions. And then there are on a layer above that, there are the secondary processes, which largely occur in the limbic system, but on a more advanced level in the limbic system. And this consists of our conditioning. So our fear conditioning, things that happen very early in life. It's a primitive kind of learning, and it's something that also animals have. Like you touch a stove, it's hot, you get conditioned not to do that again. So that's the secondary process. And then on the third level, the upper level, on the level of the neocortex, that's the tertiary process. And this is where we learn to reflect on our own feelings, or to reflect on our own emotions, or on our primary and secondary processes. So it allows us to choose our reactions. For example, like one primary process is a feeling of hunger. And if there was no neocortex, if there was no tertiary process, I would try to snatch anything I can see. I go into a store and I would steal something because I'm hungry, so I'm gonna see it, and it's there. But the tertiary process, it modulates and modifies the emotional responses of the primary processes and says, no, wait a second. There is a time and place, and I'm sure you can wait just a little bit more so we can go home and cook something nice, or something like that. Or in the case of emotions, it's like you're feeling all this anger, but the tertiary processes in the neocortex, they tell you, but this is not the right thing to express your anger here and now. This is something that you can express it in a more constructive way. For example, put it into some sort of work, or go somewhere else and scream or punch a pillow, like that. It allows you to direct and modulate those primary processes.
I like that.
So yeah.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And then in the limbic, that's like the hippocampus where lots of our memories are triggered. Am I right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then one of the other things, thanks so much. That's super helpful. And Bessel van der Kolk says that it's very, very, very difficult to heal like deep wounding in, say, the hippocampus or in these primary process, these very primitive parts of the brain, because their capacity for integration and regulation gets damaged by trauma. I don't know. Can you talk about that maybe a little bit?
Yeah, it's of course the lower it is on that hierarchy, the more difficult it will be to change those neural patterns. I'm not an expert in this, in neurotherapy, but or on like looking at a neuroscientific perspective of therapy, but yes, so the more down you go in the brain, the more primitive it is, and the more difficult it is to change those patterns. And the more down you go, the more I would see that you would require something akin to grace to change that which is very deep and which you are very deeply conditioned by. So this is, for example, there's a story of the person who came up with a 12-step program, and he was an alcoholic himself, and he went to Carl Jung to get help, like, please help me. And Carl Jung tried, but in the end, he told him, I can't help you because, and he's telling him, all right, so what can help me? He's like, you need to turn to God. You need to turn to like this some kind of spiritual aspect, because and that's in fact what he did in the 12-step program. The last of the 12 steps are turning to a higher power. And so I think that when something is so deeply entrenched in the physical, we need to move beyond the physical to heal it.
It's so interesting. That was the last thing I expected you to say, because my kind of route would be the deeper it is, the more physical it needs to get, the more about the physiology, the activation, the cortisol, the adrenaline, the ability to self-regulate at a neurophysiological level. And maybe it's both.
Yeah. It's yeah, of course. I mean, to have the realizations be rooted in the body is important too. But that is important for all kinds of therapy. I don't think any kind of therapy will be really helpful if we don't integrate it into the body, if it's not really allowed to. But yeah, I don't, I'm trying to understand myself. So I don't have 100% like clear-cut answer, but this is what's coming to me now.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, that's very interesting. I like grace. For me is evocative of transcendence, and that is, I can't really do this alone. I can witness what is happening to myself and then draw on something. And it's interesting to link it to Enneagram 4. I mean, we've got equanimity here, which is being able to be in harmony with what's actually happening to me in the here and now, and being able to tolerate the distress of my suffering. But the holy idea of 4 is that holy origin, is that sense of there is some kind of self that can hold all of this, that transcends my experience, that is the inner ground, the ground of being, that I'm connected to the ultimate ground of being, I like to think in terms of the foundation of awareness, the kind of more Buddhist metaphor, that the foundation of awareness is always there for us. That for me, obviously, as a head type, it's more about safety. But with 4 and identity, the sense of being plugged in so deeply to grace. I often think of Holy Origin as a kind of fountain, a wellspring of pure being and love. Or I don't even, you can't put words to it because it's ineffable. But
Yeah,
that's what grace is bringing to mind. Yeah, sorry, Saleh.
I think, I believe, I can imagine that if type 4 has an experience of holy origin, that would really address the trauma. And if they have an experience, whether that is through some kind of spiritual practice or if that is a near-death experience, but this is something well documented, that near-death experiences are very, very, very healing. People come out of near-death experiences with a totally changed conception of the world and themselves.
Yes.
So
Yes.
this is something that exists, and this is something that in science we've started to look at it and take it seriously. So it's helpful to kind of demystify the mystical and say that, look, it exists and it's real and it can help you beyond of what any therapeutic technique can.
Thank you for that. And you reminded me of Naranjo and his work on psychedelics, where the psychedelic reveals the psyche to itself, and we're able to see the story that we're caught in. We're able to see the samsara. We're able to see the distortions of our mind that keep us stuck. And through that experience of self-revelation, to distantiate ourselves from it. This is the work of the inner observer, is to distance ourselves in some way from the superego and from our normal ways of thinking, and being able to see, oh, that's my map. That's the map I'm walking around with day in, day out. And I don't have to only reference that map. I don't only have to have the salient landscape of everyone else is better than me, or, you know, whatever our ego story is. We're able to experience a different home base for our identity. And that near-death experiences are very similar from all of the ones I've watched videos about, is that people suddenly see their whole life from a different vantage point. It's like having an out-of-body experience where you see yourself and life, and there's a narrative arc, and there's meaning, and then there's the choice to come back. For most near-death experiences, it's like, I'm going back to live this life, and there's new meaning, and there's a new sense of what I really am. And all the things I once believed about myself are suddenly ephemeral. I think that happens with the things like plant medicines and that as well. I know people that have done ayahuasca describe that as well, that the stories go. But then for me, the somatic part about that is, how do we integrate these peak experiences into the micro details of the now? I'm not living thinking about my ayahuasca experience, or I'm not thinking about that peak experience that I had in some Sufi shrine or in meditation, because that, I know as a 7, I do that. I'm walking around thinking about my experience. In Buddhism, they say that's actually one of the traps of a spiritual experience, is that you start thinking about it and remembering it, and you get stuck because of that, because you're not really here. So for me, everything, how does it bring us out of our ego story into being, living, and being in a responsivity with where we are? And yeah, let me move on a bit, and we can reflect back where it connects. So yeah, then the other question, basically, what is personality? And we also take this for granted as Enneagram practitioners. We're stepping back. Daniel Siegel, and then the neurobiology, like Saleh was saying, we've got these conditioned responses and they're adaptive, neurodevelopmental kind of pathways and styles of engaging with reality. In cognitive science, they speak about acquired differences and sensitivities in how we get a grip on life. John Vervaeke uses this term optimal grip, that we are walking around trying to get an optimal grip on reality. Our consciousness is here, embedded in this material world, and from little, we're trying to figure out what's going on. We're trying to survive. We're trying to have relationships. And he speaks about personality as styles in gripping. So there's styles in mapping, there's styles in gripping, and there's so many choices being made there. A lot of them are unconscious. So I really, and this links with trauma, and it's very, very helpful in working with trauma to think about the ego not as a structure. It's a process. The ego is not a thing. It's not something inside us that we're trying to fix or break or escape from or whatever it is. It's patterns of information processing. This is the cognitive science view, is functional information processing. So here we are as an evolved being. We're walking around with ideas in our head, mental model, propositions, which is like truth claims, like the world is a dangerous place, Enneagram 8. The world is a dangerous place, or the world, it's a jungle out there, life is tough, life owes you nothing. These would be some of the propositions in an 8's head that then frame their whole view and their map of reality. Then our perspectives, preoccupations, and interpretations are also processes. They're like, what do we notice? How do I interpret my role in this room? Am I here to give you a swimming lesson or to teach you to sing happy birthday? No, we're here together talking about Enneagram 4. And my construal of my role in this moment is that I'm here to facilitate an interesting learning experience, and you hopefully walk away with some value and insights. And that there are wonderful people in this room who, have got great things to teach. So that's my perspective on what's going on right here and now. And hopefully, I'm matching some of, what your expectations are and why you're here, which is something that I care about. And then the participation style is how am I in this space? And all of us are doing this all the time. As a coach, you've got an idea of what coaching is. You've got a perspective on who you are as a coach. You're participating in that space in a certain way. So if you're a 5, you might be worried about being an expert on the Enneagram. Or if you're a 7, you might be busy trying to pep talk your client and make them feel better. As a 3, you might want them to get the act together and get to the goal. So, how you construe the situation informs then your patterns of acting, which is the procedures and the steps. So you can see that all of these things are processes in response to being here. And this for me is the difference, is even though I've got this lovely schematic that I made about the Enneagram and all the layers, so-called layers of the so-called structure of the ego, that's a schematic to remember facts. It's not what we really look like. So it's got some use in terms of understanding there's wounding, their defenses, their outward behaviors. But if you want to work with a trauma-informed perspective, it's more helpful to think about process, and that these processes are learned. These processes are learned in response to early childhood context on the foundation of these, primary emotions and our underlying neurophysiology. So these are the trauma aspects of the Enneagram here. So you've got your genetics, etc. And then you've got the what Naranjo calls the degradation of consciousness, which is that infant awareness and consciousness and experience of being, then having various impingements and suffering and gaps and frustrations and things happening that feel life and death to a tiny infant. You know, for a tiny infant, if the mother's on the phone and doesn't come quickly, that kid's going to be thinking, I'm going to die, I better scream louder. And, you know, a baby screaming at 3 a.m., you can hear that for them it's a matter of life and death. So we're looking at these things here that happen in childhood. We've got the object relations dominant affect, and in the case of 4s, it's a frustration type. We've got the heart wounds. I've got a slide in here on that somewhere. And the lost childhood messages. So for 4, that sense of, you know, you're special, you're valuable, you're unique, I'm attuned to you, I care about your unique being. Who are you? I'm interested in you. You're not just somebody in the background, you know, that I need to feed every now and then. And then any kind of deficit in the holding environment. So it could be a deficit in attunement, safety, you know, the support for your agency. So there's not a one-to-one relationship between the type of deficit and type, but we definitely do see patterns. So then, yeah, so the childhood, there's so much in the Enneagram about childhood trauma that helps us to understand these defensive strategies and patterns and maps and, you know, the ways in which we're trying to figure out how to be to survive. So the Enneagram helps us understand the processes and the strategies that we then deploy. And all of these things, there's a continuum between kind of everyday trauma of, you know, the example I gave, you know, of, you know, the mom takes 1 minute long to get to feed the child versus extreme forms of, you know, adverse childhood experiences. But the thing that's universal is an experience of some kind of deficit that necessitates some kind of coping strategy. So with the 4, we've got in the object relations, we've got the 4 in the withdrawal triad, and in the object relations, we've got frustration, and in the Hornevian triads, we've got withdrawal. So those, I don't really want to get into this. It's a lot of theory, and there's a lot on it, and quite a lot of disagreement in the Enneagram community about this. But if you're interested in it, B. Chestnut has done some cool work, and also Belinda Gore. But the basic message here is that 4s are frustrated with the caregiving environment. They're not seen, they're not validated, they're not held. There's not an attentive attunement. There's not a validation. And what I have found with 4s, which I find quite interesting, is a lot of the neurodiverse autistic people that I know, who've got a lot of sensory hypersensitivity and stuff like that, are 4s. And my little hypothesis is that the feeling of invalidation, invisibility, and meaning I don't matter is because the parents don't realize the sensitivity of the child. The parents don't appreciate, understand, validate, respect, and care for the fact that that child cannot handle bright lights, loud noises, horrible textures, ugly places, disruption. You know, 4s, I think, are very sensitive and intuitive beings in their nature. They're by nature very refined, very, very, very refined in their awareness and their sensibilities. They're very aesthetically sensitive. And I think in a household where that's not noticed, and the 4 is subjected to things that are conventional and blunt that then there is a natural sense of, I can't do this. I don't belong here. This isn't me. And an actual hatred for normalcy. And that's part of a coping strategy is, to create an identity out of the fact that I really don't fit in, and there's something wrong with me. And the only way to handle there being something wrong with me is to think I'm special. And so, this is kind of on the basis of a lot of coaching work, and a lot of people who even just have 4 in their tri-type, I find often have quite a lot of neurodivergent features, whether it's ADD and we don't know whether these things are related to trauma or just, underlying wiring. But I think that's part of what gives rise to the sense here, this heart wound, is the sense of the stabbed heart for 4 is this pain of I'm experiencing pain. I'm not loved. No one cares about me. I don't matter. Do I even exist? No one's noticing what I actually feel at all. And that's the heart wound of 4, is the stabbed heart of nobody cares what I feel. Nobody cares who I am. And nobody notices who I am. And that's becomes a core part of the identity. So Russ Hudson uses the metaphor of 4 standing in the middle of the road, kind of bleeding to death and people just walking past. And for me, that's a good metaphor for a very, very sensitive child being thrown into a very insensitive household, where, whatever it might, I'm not saying bad parents necessarily at all. It's just that, people can be stressed and misattuned, or if they're super neurotypical, they've got very normative expectations that don't align with a different kind of nervous system. So, yeah, that's one of my theories about the sense of stabbed hearts. Saleh, I don't know if you want to say anything about that. You might think I'm talking garbage from a neuroscience perspective.
No, not at all. But about what thing specifically were you thinking?
About a refined sensibility and sensitivity in the 4 that meets a context that isn't attuned to that, isn't sensitive to that.
Yeah. What I was thinking there is if it is indeed the case that there exists a correlation between the type 4 pattern and for example like something like autism, it would be in line with the explanation that autism happens due to that you're too sensitive for the world, and just the mere fact of living and existing in it creates a trauma.
Exactly.
That it doesn't assault to your capacity to pay attention or to or to emotionally pay attention and so on.
Exactly.
So yeah, I don't know if there is such a correlation. It will be interesting to investigate. But
Yeah.
it is a plausible thought.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this thing about sensitivity, the overwhelm, the difficulty processing, the search for beauty and refinement, and as opposed to, like I'm going to go and work in a bank in a cubicle with neon lighting, and I'm going to work 9 to 5 and make a lot of money. You say that to most 4s, they're like, I would rather live in a stick hovel and eat cockroaches, because the sensory conditions of that life are unbearable. Petra?
Yeah, as I was listening to you, I was just thinking I mean, it's very interesting what you're saying about the link with possible link with neurodivergence, but I also wonder, one could also frame it just as in terms of the system that we live in. Because when I think of my childhood and the sensitivity, as you were speaking, I was just thinking, what was I sensitive? But what I do remember most is this disillusionment with the world, that the world was unjust, that people didn't care about what happened to the planet and those kind of things. So that's kind of where what you were saying connects to with me, and that this feeling of like, how can everyone else just accept that this is how it is? And being told by adults, oh, you'll learn that,
Yes.
this is just the way things are and you can't change it. I think that for me is that sensitivity and that meeting place where the tension was or is, that maybe it's not always a neurodivergence in the sense that we think of it, that it's also maybe a clash of a fundamental belief in the goodness of the world, and then being confronted with how things are. And I guess that's where maybe the connection is with a more systemic way of viewing the world that we live in, the culture that we live in, and how that works for certain people and it doesn't work for other people.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a helpful refinement. I think my sense there, because I'm being dogmatic about the neurodiversity hypothesis, is that I would imagine that sense of the earth and sentience and nature and beauty informs the sense of what is just, what is good, what is true, what is beautiful, that there's an underlying intuitive connectedness to things that informs the development of those kind of beliefs. I don't know, but yeah, thank you for that. And maybe also there's a social, like I'm talking from a particular instinctual preoccupation with my eyes on a certain zone, which is more, immediate or maybe interpersonal. But then there's the social sensitivity, which is maybe a different instinctual awareness or a systemic, like a big picture. I imagine Enneagram 9s would also be more aware and sensitive to that, to the connectedness. Thank you. So let's look at some of the other stuff. It's checking time. Okay. So this anti-self-action thing is, for me, I love this teaching in the Enneagram, that because our true self, and I don't like to think of this as a thing either, as an essence, it's because the natural arising of our feelings and experience and self-expression, just the moment-to-moment realness of our experience wasn't welcome in some way. The deficits didn't allow us to experience our experience without it being dangerous, without the risk of being shamed, humiliated, controlled, suppressed, abandoned, whatever it is, that we needed to do something to ourselves, to our own experience, to get rid of the part that would put us in danger of re-traumatization. So for self-controlling is that if I'm just myself, then I'm going to be shamed and humiliated. So I need to craft a particular identity and image. And, when I first saw self-controlling for 4, I thought that's weird. I don't think of 4s as particularly self-controlled, in terms of discipline, structure, my normal associations with control. But they're controlling in terms of how they present themselves to the world, and the curation of a certain identity. And the idea is that 4s are experiencing themselves in the gaze of the other a lot of the time. So while I'm doing something, I'm imagining that somebody is watching me, or what would this look like to somebody else? So, you know, the way I arrange things, it's not just because this makes me feel better, it's how do I look because of this? Everything's imbued with some sense of identity. So let's look at what Sandra Maitri says about this story, about specialness, Maitri. She is the one who conveyed these Ichazo anti-self actions in her book, The Spiritual Dimension of the Enneagram. So she speaks about what shame refers to here: embarrassment, humiliation, all of this. And this feeling of being rejected or ridiculed, losing the respect of others. I don't know if the fours in the room can think of a time, you know, that they felt these things, or were shamed or humiliated, whether there's a link for you there. And then developing the anticipation that the external world will shame them, and a sense of being there's something wrong. So there's a projection of the superego onto the world of anticipating shame. And in order to avoid that shame, there's a withdrawal into, well, I don't fit in anyway, and they're going to reject me, and they think I'm weird, and you know, it starts getting a story attached to it in order to make it tolerable to live under this imagined, anticipated shame. And so this movement away from the world and from convention and from normativity is blamed on those they're isolating themselves from. Like, you know, you'll hear, I can't hang around with normies and listen to their bullshit. I don't like going to, you know, these barbecues where people are talking about the share options, you know, whatever. You often find fours dissing things. Even the four, the Essex four particularly, the nickname, Naranjo's nickname is hate. That identity is defined in terms of what I hate. And you can hear my four feeling style coming out in a lot of what I say. You know, when I speak about the cubicle and the bank and the corporate career, I mean, I did spend like 15 years there, but part of my identity is not that. And potentially part of it is why? Because maybe I couldn't really be successful in that environment, I think. You know, maybe I imagine that at some level people thought I was ridiculous or weird or whatever. And then I, you know, had to alienate myself from it and blame people for being boring and normal and unimaginative and small-minded, or whatever things you come up with to justify the alienation. So then in the anti-self action of self-controlling, I don't know if you notice this about fours. I certainly do with many students, sometimes clients, that not really in the client space, things are often different, but in a social space that fours are composed. There's another one here, studied. I like this word studied, that fours are aware of the image that they are aligning with themselves with. And the introjection that they have as a defense mechanism is also the introjection of things that they can use to reinforce their idealized ego image. The music that I like, the art that I like, the food that I like, the people that I like, the books that I read, all of those things are taken in to be how I create and control my sense of my identity to myself and to the world. So that's what's meant by the anti-self action of self-control, is this kind of studied, almost contrived sense of identity that is that makes me feel a little bit safe, because then I've defended myself in advance against feeling inadequate, broken, useless, bad. So this specialness in trauma-informed language is a pride-based compensation, which we all have, not just hard types, or 2, every single type has a pride-based compensation for a shame-based identification. I didn't put that in here, but it's quite a helpful term as well. It's also Lawrence Heller. Shame-based identification forms the foundation then for a pride-based compensation. So Enneagram 3s, the shame-based identification is not having any value, worthlessness. The pride-based compensation is then, how do I look good, seem valuable, seem prestigious, all of those things. So this is Sandra Maitri on 4, pretty helpful. And Heller particularly, I really like him because he does it with such compassion. You know, he says, it makes sense that you needed this identity to cope. It makes sense, it's normal, it's right. And also then the normalization of shame. I want to check the time because I want to get to some of the trauma stuff. So I've included a whole bunch of Enneagram information here that I really want to go into more of the typology. You know, this is the usual stuff we get in Ennealand, which is all the things that are wrong with us and all the things that are wrong with our type and our strategy and how deluded we are and how hopeless our type strategy is. And some more compassionate than others. Like I really like this teaching, Pursuits, around the way in which the passion, which is the vice, but the word passion means suffering, shows up in the different centers of intelligence. And this, I think, has got some nice depth to it, to understand that something like envy has a carnal aspect to it, a body center aspect to it, a heart center aspect to it, and a mental center aspect to it. And we can work with all 3. So yeah, lots of features of type. One of the things that I'm interested in is this leaden rule of how we do our fear to other people. And if we can understand that as almost like an introjected bad parent in a way, that we then enact our type on other people. Our type fear, we make other people fear the fear of our type. But yeah, there's quite a bunch of stuff here. This is all Tom Condon on the different subtypes. I'm not going to go into that. But I just wanted to point out Jerry Wagner's work has also got 3 centers around the maladaptive cognitive schema, the maladaptive emotional schema, maladaptive behavioral schema in each of the types. And I think it's quite helpful to think in these terms. So the cognitive schema, when 4s exaggerate their sensitive qualities and uniqueness, they over-identify with the self-image of I'm special and unique. And then they start constructing ideas about how they don't fit in, and, you know, they're grappling with these very meaningful questions and get very, very busy in their heads with all the mentation about who am I, what is my life, what's wrong with me, all of that stuff, what should I be, who could I be? So there's an idealized identity that 4s also want to be. Tom Condon says that 4s envy themselves, the version of themselves that they want to be. So they long to be the version of themselves that they want to be, and then they compare themselves against that. And envy is self-comparison, basically. It's like I envy myself and what I should be and what I could be. So this is the cognitive circus, which we all have a different one. The emotional schema of comparing themselves to others and then having the pain of coming up short and experiencing that pain, the pain, physical, of envy. Like that person's got their shit together, they're okay. Even if they're not doing something that I want to do or have something that I want to have at all, it's that they're okay and they're doing well and they're fine and they're living their happy life, and look, they've got a good relationship. So it's this constant self-comparison against literally anything in other people. It could be a child playing happily and thinking, oh, I didn't have a childhood like that. So there are many ways in which 4s are tacitly triggered again and again and again in this self-comparison. So to become aware of that is also helpful. To be walking around, noticing a tacit trigger, noticing the stab, noticing the like, okay, I don't need to do that. I don't need to compare myself and go down that rabbit hole. And then this, he says, behavioral schema, perceiving the world as abandoning. He says possessions here, qualities. Then fours are driven to make themselves special and uncommon. Here he speaks about the moods. Here you can see it's not particularly trauma informed in that it's not very kind. It's quite judgmental. So for me, the constant thing is, why was this a good idea? Why was this strategy a good idea? And this is where we get to some of the modalities and methods. So the self-conscious state where the self is split, where we're imagining the self in the eyes of others. And if you think about it, that's really inaccurate. But for fours, that's a pretty much continuous thing. Is I'm imagining myself in the eyes of others. What is this person thinking? What is that person thinking? And it's very different from guilt. So there's quite a lot in the trauma literature about the difference between shame and guilt. So shame engenders this desire to hide, escape, withdraw. Guilt is something where there's a central me, I made a mistake and I can repair it. Shame is there's something wrong with me. And so I want to get to this just now. This is about how to work with it. I'm going to move that. There's an exercise here. This takes some time. I don't want to rush it. I think I'll put it in the chat if I can for you to look at. I want to play a little Richard Schwartz video, because in internal family systems, we always validate these parts. We don't shame them. We don't say shame is bad. We say, what? Well, shame must have been a good idea for some reason. There's a part of you that needed to step in and shame you. It was protective. So let's listen a bit to what he says. Up to my screen share for video clip. Okay, I'm not going to play the whole thing because he goes into case study, but I want you to just get the initial sense.
How can we help clients escape the burden of worthlessness? Some clients hold on to this deep sense of shame, a feeling that they're just plain bad. Dr. Richard Schwartz says that there's often one part of themselves that keeps people in this negative space, and it's protecting them from something even worse.
I mean, shame gets a really bad name in psychotherapy, and for me, it's a natural human emotion in the sense that we're born with the knowledge that our lives depend on being accepted by our tribe. We're mammals, and we're not going to survive without the help of a tribe or a family or community. And so the terror, there's a terror that comes with being shamed, almost a survival terror. Like if I'm not valued, if I am actually seen as a liability or something bad, then young parts of us fear for our survival. So to counter or to keep us from doing anything that might bring on that kind of shame, we have what is commonly known as an inner critic, who again gets a really bad name in our field, but generally is just desperately trying to keep us from getting shamed by the outside world. And in people who've had a lot of experiences with shame, as a child in particular, that critic can take on the voice of the shaming parent just because it's desperate to get you to behave the way that parent wanted you to, so that you don't get more shame from that parent. So shame for me is that. It's that critical voice that says you're bad, and if you do this other thing, you're going to be even worse. And then there's one of these exiled parts, young, vulnerable part that actually believes that you're bad, that you're worthless, that message that came from one of those parents goes right to the heart of these young exile parts and becomes what I call the burden of worthlessness. So in that way, shame is a two-part phenomena. There's a critic who says you're a shit, and then there's this young part that believes it. And then usually there's yet another part whose job it is to get you away from the shame. And sometimes we'll resort to extreme behaviors that actually then bring on more shame. So a lot of clients, when they feel shamed, will go get drunk, for example, or will act out sexually, or will do something to get away from that feeling, or will get enraged with somebody. Because if I feel rage, I'm powerful. I'm not feeling so worthless and bad. But then that part that does the sort of rescue from the shame brings on more shame from the outside world, which then adds fuel to the critic. And so you get this kind of vicious cycle going inside. So, so that's how I see shame. That, and particularly that critic is very malign, but it's actually just trying its best to keep you safe, either by shaming you into behaving better, looking better, performing at a higher level, or by shaming you so you don't take any risks, so that you feel worthless to the point where you don't go outside the house, or you don't say anything that might be risky with another person. So I recently did a consultation with a trauma survivor.
Okay, I want to stop there with him. But you can see the underlying ethos that if you're working in this way, trauma-informed people don't shame. They don't try and get rid of it. They don't say it's bad. They will say, what role did it play? What function did it have? And then very much acknowledging, how is it inhibiting your life now? And then how do we come into almost right relationship with life as it is now in the present moment, and all the potentials that life offers, which are very different to what potentials exist for a terrified child. No, the inner critic doesn't know that we're an adult. It thinks we're, usually single digits, and it needs to protect us from those early experiences. So that's an inner parts perspective. And then when we're working with fours, I want to get to this. What you'll notice with fours quite often is that they are dissociated, and they're not actually often being very emotional, and they aren't often actually very in touch with their actual feelings. They are in their heads and busy analyzing their feelings, not necessarily feeling them, and often they think their feelings into more than they are. So yes, they're big feelings there, but the way of processing them is not often to stay with them and be with them, but to think about them and analyze them. And also, fours mostly that in the Enneagram literature and in some of my experience are ashamed of their shame. So one of the things that's really helpful in four work is validating and naming and normalizing shame. That absolutely we needed attunement, we needed connection, we needed somebody to care about what we were feeling and to spend time with us and ask us. My example, what would you like to do today? Oh, wow, look at that picture you just drew. Tell me about that picture. Letting the child choose the activities for the day. And, if the child says, no, I don't want to go to the loud, noisy shopping center, say, what would you like to do? Okay, let's go play with the fairies. doing something that the child wants to do. That's what children need. And to be able to validate for your client the fact that they didn't get what they needed. They didn't get it. They didn't get the attunement that they needed, and that is very painful, and that the heart wound is the stabbed heart, and it's bad, it's painful. So for me, that's a big part of trauma-informed work, is validation of the heart wound and the fact that we needed a strategy, that yes, there's trauma. So not going into the story doesn't mean pretending that nothing happened. It's absolutely validating the fact that there is shame, that is completely normal. Like Richard Schwartz was saying, we wanted connection and we didn't get it, and there's grief in that. But then, as part of that, staying away from any pep talk or advice or thinking that you must get the 4 out of feeling bad, because that's shaming and negating. It's like you shouldn't feel the way you feel. Later on, 4s will start feeling better when they start grounding in their body and feeling resourced and noticing that there's so much more to themselves and their being. But that comes from resourcing, strengthening, grounding, inner coherence, inner organization. Then the 4 by themselves will feel better. If you try and tell 4 they should feel better, you're basically re-traumatizing them because they were negated as part of their early childhood misattunement, is that it was like, don't feel what you're feeling. So that's something to be very aware of. Don't fix at all. What was missing was attunement and presence and acceptance and validation. An acknowledgement that everything the 4's feeling is actually true. Life is freaking tough, and the world is harsh and difficult to cope with, and loss is real, and impermanence is real, and the suffering is real. And we have to somehow develop the capacity to live our lives. And everybody does want to feel okay and feel a sense of ease of being at some level. Then in the room with 4s, paying attention to body cues, and to the extent that it's available, to be able to work with your client to bring the client awareness to that. Like, I noticed when you were talking about that, you look down. How are you feeling right now as you say that word? I noticed your throat got a bit tighter when you said that word. How is that feeling in your throat? What happened? So what you're doing there is you're not invalidating the feeling, you're not fixing, you're not going into story. You're bringing the client to here we are together, and guess what? I care, and I'm noticing what's going on with you right now. I noticed, and I care, and I'm interested, and I'm asking you to tell me about what's really going on for you, which is something they've maybe never ever had before in their life, and might be pretty terrifying. So if a 4 doesn't want to go there with you and they want to go back into story, cool. That's just about safety, and then connect in the way that the client wants to connect. But the whole idea is, how do we bring into presence, and it's helping the client to build rapport with themselves in the moment. Then other things about posture, closed in posture, freezing and seeming internally trapped or constricted. That metaphor that Petra spoke about being closed in on yourself versus, hey, what can I see when I lift my head? What can I see when I move and walk? Suddenly I'm not closed in on myself, and I'm not frozen, and I'm not trapped and constricted inside this world of my self-analysis, which is painful. But there are moments of, I can come out of here for a second and I can experience something, the sea and the wind and the whatever it is. Then body dissociation is one of the things. I mean, these are common to a lot of trauma. This is just more about shame. And I don't want to act like this is all four. This is all of us, but more specific about when we experience shame. And what I find with fours, Tom also speaks about this, when they're talking, they often look up and they've got pictures going in their mind and memories and descriptions and flashbacks. So to help them notice when they're going there and give them little pathways back to, okay, what does it feel like to remember that? What does it feel like to talk to me about that now? And I found that's very, very difficult, because that was what was not provided in their life. It was not there, and it doesn't feel safe or real. It's the same reason why sevens, you don't just yank them into the present moment and ask them about their feelings. The same with eights. You don't try and make them be vulnerable, because like, are you crazy? So to respect the person's defense mechanisms, their coping strategy, and to maybe just offer little opportunities for them to try out, breathing or coming here. Yeah, and then identity questions in the coaching relationship with fours will often experience pressure in the relationship, which means that they come in feeling wrong, inadequate, desperate. They might even be comparing themselves to you, thinking you've got your act together and you're okay and I'm not okay. Because that's in most interactions. It's like, you're okay, I'm not okay, you're okay, I'm not okay. So you can expect that to be part of their experience. And so I actually find it quite helpful with my four clients to jump in with them and to just seriously validate the experience. Like, I've had four clients on the brink of suicide, and I've said, yeah, I totally get it. I totally get it. When I was there and I had to choose, am I going to live or die? And then the fours, like, they didn't expect that somebody would be so 100% unshaming of being in that place. And it's normalized, it's like there's absolutely nothing wrong with you for getting to a moment where you don't know whether you want to live. And that is a turning point in a session often, and in that person's experience, to say, yeah, I can kill myself anytime I want. I could do it in the next hour. And that's a choice that's available to me. And do I want to make that choice or not? And for someone to sit with me and be validating the reality of my experience, the reality that I have that choice available to me, and to be talking about what else, what does that choice potentially mean? Maybe this is my near-death experience in this room with you. So for me, that takes the pressure off fours to need to pretend to be okay in any way at all. That's the complete unshaming, unpressuring. It's like you're having your experience, we're all muddling along in this life, trying to be okay. You've got your coping strategy. It's worked for you in some ways. It hasn't worked for you in others, just like every other person on this earth. So it's normalizing, validating, and at the same time, that person is special and unique. So it's a kind of paradox that normal doesn't mean conventional. It's actually conventional is being quite a mess in reality. We're all struggling. Every religion in the world is about coping with human suffering and loss and trauma and abandonment and existential nothingness. So, for me to just normalize the suffering is a big help. And then you might find your four clients curating the self to be special or interesting or impressive. I'm laughing because I went to a Jungian analyst for a long time who was a very impressive person and super smart and like knew everything about contemporary art and all of this. And so my 4 in the room and all my shame and whatever, I spent a lot of time like trying to learn about his interests and to have interesting conversations with him about Jung and movies. I spent a hell of a lot of money spending time curating myself in that room to be his most interesting client. And guess how much actual progress I made in healing my shame? Guess. Out of 100. The things that cure shame are very different to that. And if you let your client train you, then you're not gonna know what's going on. You're not gonna see what's happening, and you're gonna miss the opportunity to find genuine relational ease and warmth and healing and unshaming. I mean, yeah, I think he was pretty impressed with me because I had a lot of interesting things to say because I'd researched before the frickin' session what I was going to say. Oh, God. Laugh. Oh, jeez. Anyway, so that's some of the cool stuff I wanted to share. Also, just before we end and I do closing stuff, I want to tell you about the 5D course because that's coming up. It's starting in June and it's 10 months on Wednesday. And it is a journey that consists of contact modules as a group where we discuss the themes, we go through material, we talk like this, we go through these kinds of things that we've done today about the trauma foundations of type and how to work with the different types. And then in between each of these modules, there are dyads, pairs, rotating pairs, where you get to work with other people. And I give you all kinds of scripts and themes to explore. A couple of you here on it. So hopefully you can give it a thumbs up. And then you do some case studies and they're one-on-ones with me along the way. There are 4 where you get to discuss your case studies and the application mastery of the model. There's a model involved with various principles. Trauma-informed coaching has got certain fundamental differences to traditional coaching in terms of content versus process. So some of that should have become pretty clear today, but if you're interested in that, get hold of me. And if anyone you know in the helping professions might be interested, let them know. But I'm going to stop there with all the slides and let's have any takeaways. I want to loop back to you, Saleh, from the neurobiological perspective and then maybe take some other comments. Anything else you want to add or that came up for you in the session?
No, I mean, what I really liked is something that you said in the beginning. Particularly, I like that is that it's not about self-analysis. That self-analysis can actually take us away from the what is therapeutic, and it becomes a preoccupation with. We become preoccupied and busy with trying to fix something that is supposedly wrong instead of being with the trauma or the pain. Yeah.
Yes.
And maybe the word pain or suffering is better because it describes an experience, a here now experience, while trauma can be used to,
Yes.
it can be used to describe a story, which becomes a mental narrative that we get stuck in. So, but from a neuroscientific perspective, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I was I wanted to present my perspectives on how the passion of the type 4 is formed, but maybe there's not enough time for that now.
Yeah. If you can make it brief, I would love to hear that, please. I'm sure everyone would, not just me.
Yeah, maybe I can share my screen very quickly.
Let me make you co-host. Hold on a sec.
All right.
Unfortunately, do you need to go on time because I'm seeing my supervisor.
Okay.
But let's hear, Saleh, the envy.
Yeah, so if I share my screen here, entire screen, share. Can you see me? Can you see
I can
this
see
screen?
all of us. You're sharing your
Perfect.
desktop.
Right.
There we go. There we go.
Right now, so here are so this is a model which I called 27 passions, and in it I try to explain the emergence of the passions, and the passions are really like how we react to the trauma. So the trauma is the specific pain or the specific difficulty of the type. And to go through these quickly, we can
Yes.
say that there are 9 specific negative emotions for the 9 types, and for type 4 it is interiorized grief.
Stay with us, don't move. Yes, please. This is very, very powerful. Very powerful. Thank you. And this is Pansep, hey? The internalized, externalized.
No, this is actually this is something that Riso and Hudson talked about in the wisdom of the Enneagram, but it's a concept that exists. I think it comes from Claudio Naranjo, this thing with the interiorized, exteriorized, and core versions of the emotions.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's not
But
in character neurosis, I don't think, but this,
no,
I like this. It's super helpful.
yeah. So, well, but yeah. So we can say that type 4. Yeah, I'm going through all of these interiorized grief. So these are the 9 specific negative emotions, and what happens is, this is also related to that, but we don't have time for that now. We have the specific negative emotion, and that is the central emotional difficulty of the type 4. It is interiorized grief means that's the specific negative emotion of type 4, means a grief that is felt in relation to oneself, to one's sense of self. So it's a grief in relation to one's own thoughts and emotions, which is associated with a sense of abandonment and estrangement, a feeling of being flawed and shame. And that feeling, that emotion is intolerable. We can't stand it. When we experience it as children, we can't. It is experienced as intolerable.
Yes.
And so what we need to compensate for that somehow. We need to react, and we react. We do that, and this is my hypothesis. I can't say that I can prove that it's right, but this is what makes the most sense to me. That the way we react to a negative state of a negative emotional state is by mobilizing something which drives us away from that. And that, I believe, is the instinctual drive. Our dominant instinct is mobilized to kind of deal with the pain of the specific negative emotion. And it's like, I don't want to feel this interiorized grief. Well, I'm going to mobilize, for example, my self-preservation instinct to try to liberate myself away from that. But this doesn't have the intended effect. And so what happens is, instead, the specific negative emotion gets entangled with the instinctual drive, and the result is the passion.
That's brilliant.
The passion is the combination of the specific negative emotion with the instinctual drive. So this means that the passion, it has both the specific negative emotion and the instinctual drive in it. And for type 4, this would be self-preservation, envy in this case. So a passion cannot be described independently from the instinctual drive that gave rise to it. A passion is both a distorted instinct and an exaggerated negative emotion at the same time.
That's
So,
really, really helpful. I
it's the
like
same thing
that,
with
the blending. With Naranjo, he speaks about how it's the distortion of the instinct as the kind of primary wound. And so it's almost like the passion is layered over the instinct. But I like this idea that some instinct is mobilized to cope with the passion.
Yes, and I will come to Claudio Naranjo's concept of it, but first let me say, like, let's look at the very concept of passion. What does passion mean? Passion means suffering. That's the meaning of the word passion. And it also means a strong liking or desire. The passion is the coexistence of the negative and the positive in one intermingled emotional state, suffering and desire. And if we look at, for example, the passion as an exaggerated negative emotion, Claudio Naranjo, to define passion, he used Kant's definition of passion, which is: an emotion is like water that breaks through a dike, passion like a torrent that makes its bed deeper and deeper. It's an exaggerated emotion. And the passion is a distorted instinct. So this is what you were talking about, that the passion is usually seen as the agent that distorts the instinct. So like we have our passion, and then that goes and distorts the for example, self-preservation instinct, and we end up with a distorted instinct. But if we flip that thing on its head and instead see the passion as the end result of the distortion of the instinct, in other words, the instinct is more primary than the passion.
Yes.
And so the passion does not distort the instinct. The passion is the distorted instinct. So that's the hypothesis.
Nice. I like that because it's also not a structural idea. It's more descriptive of an emotional process. Then it works.
Yeah. And of course, when the passion is created, it creates a sense of frustration because it does not have the intended effect. We are not liberated from this negative emotion. It creates frustration, and then it creates a perpetual negative cycle that reinforces itself with time.
That's exactly, and that's why some of the teachers, I got it from Chris Hurwitz, but speaking about the fake cure. Saleh, we're going to have to stop with the slides there, but we're going to, hopefully you're going to come back and talk about that again.
Of course.
We're still seeing your desktop, which is it's confusing me because there are two of me, two of everyone. But thank you, that's incredibly helpful. It's incredibly helpful.
Thank you.
To make it more specific to the subtype. I wish we had another half an hour. I've quickly emailed the person and said I'm going to be a bit late because I want to hear from you. Anybody who wants to share anything that's really stood out for you tonight, any aha moments, light bulbs, or anything that you'd like to share. Maybe loop back to you now, Petra, for some closing comments, and then anyone else who wants to jump in. Our two resident experts here.
Not sure I've got any closing comments.
Okay.
Just in my, how can I fix this?
Oh dear.
Maybe I'll have to ask Ingrid what strategy the four should employ to fix this. This is like the one voice.
No, yeah, exactly.
No, it's been very useful. Thank you. I mean, there is a healing itself in recognizing oneself, right? Like and feeling less alone with it because you can see that it's not just you, that there is a pattern that's a particular strategy. Like I guess that's always in the trauma work that I'm familiar with, that's always the thing. Trauma comes from doing something and being alone with it, but when you have the experience and when you recognize the experience and you're not alone with it, that's already a step up from being traumatized.
Yes.
So
Yes, that's right. There's a resourcing in the connection and the understanding. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you. Anyone else want to speak about what they saw and experienced? Hi, Nancy. Unmute. Don't forget to unmute.
This was great. Thank you.
Pleasure.
What got triggered for me was way back in the resources, external, relational, internal. I got bummed out because I made my list and I felt a stomach ache. And I wrote down, I have less support as the years go by. Okay. Then I start adding, and the lists all get longer, internal, relational. And then I calm down. And then I realize once I go into gratitude or acknowledgement and rebalance, I'm freed up to deal with the emotional stuff that normally drowns a four. It's like I have no footing. So how can I even problem solve? Fours don't problem solve, they mush to whatever boundaries there. So
Wow.
that was helpful. I felt I had agency.
Wonderful. Wow. So I love that metaphor of footing. Like I've got a footing to deal with the feelings. I'm not trying to get rid of the feelings. I'm just giving myself the best chance of dealing with them by giving myself a footing. And I find that metaphor that there's like a reassurance in it for me.
Yeah, I could always come back to it.
Yes.
It's like the shore. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And just that moment of noticing, like I'm turning the exercise into a list of deficits. That's why I put the tree so that nobody would say, I don't have a relationship.
I haven't given authorization to discuss my shortcomings.
I'm discussing my
You're right.
shortcomings, Nancy.
No, you're absolutely right. I'll say no before yes. Yes.
Oh, thank you. Anyone else want to speak about anything they're taking away? Jump in, anybody? Lala Nati, that's a new name. Rachel?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know. I think I might be on a different email. But I just wanted to say I really do think that presentation on shame was incredibly powerful. Just understanding the two parts of shame and the function they play, and that was really beautiful. And just to say, it's been a wonderful session, but also like being part of the 5D course as well and practicing noticing those shifts in your own experience when you bring awareness to that something is happening. It really is very powerful, so that you notice the state and it changes your experience of yourself like relatively quickly, because you actually bringing your attention to something else other than stepping into the cycle of the thinking or the analysis about whatever it is that you're doing. So it's a very, very, very helpful practice. So thank you for the course
so
and
much
for this information.
Thank you. Thank you. Such a pleasure. Does anyone else want to say anything? Judy, I saw you laughing and nodding a few times.
It's just funny to me to hear other fours talk because our experiences are so different and yet they're so similar. You know, like when Petra, when you were talking about having the kind of bubbly joy up in your heart, and I can relate to that. But what makes me feel really solid is when I feel that sort of weight down lower in my body, and so I'm fully grounded in my body. And that makes me able to engage because my reflex is to disengage. And you know, it's primarily shame-based, right? Like, I can't engage with you guys because whatever I say is not going to be up to par, and the par is whatever crazy fantasy bar that I've set for myself, and y'all don't even know about it, much less hold me to it. Right? So my practice is to, like, my practice is very structured and routine. And what I was hearing Petra say is things like, you know, I don't have to hold myself to a specific schedule to do that. I just know that every day I need to move and all those things. I need to do that too. But I've got so much one energy in me. If it's not organized, I'm a failure and I'll give up. So I have to have very structured routine in my day for really dumb stuff. Like, you know, I go to the same grocery store every time and make my bed every morning, and, you know, really, really appallingly boring stuff. But it keeps me in my body, and staying in my body keeps me engaged with the world, because I can't hear anything you're saying if I'm busy doing this. So in that case, I don't have any relational resources if I'm doing that all the time. I don't have any because I haven't shown up to the relationship. So fortunately, I started learning that a long time ago, so I'm okay at it now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Judy.
Thanks, Ingrid. Thanks, everybody else,
So
too.
funny. Thank you. You always make me laugh with how self-deprecating you are, but too much. But I put the shame exercise in the chat. I don't know if it's easy for you to get. Just a little reflection exercise that brings you from remembering shame to how do I feel now talking about it, which I think of as a very good sleight of hand, you know, to go from story to now. I often find it helpful with twos as well, because twos spend a lot of time talking about their relationship and the other person, and complaining about the other person. And then you say, how does it feel to be telling me about this right now in your body, in your chest, in your heart? And then they get a big fright. In a way, it's like that whole thing just is gone. And then they're here with you, feeling their feelings. So there's the exercise in the chat, and then also I've got a little infographic about shame that I found quite helpful. It's from NICAM, the National Institute of Clinical and Behavioral Medicine, that I think I've bought like 500 gigabytes of their material.
I have to go. Bye.
Okay, cheers, Nancy. Thanks, bye. So yeah, I also have to go, but thank you so much all for being here. And thank you, Saleh and Petra, for your teaching contributions, and everyone else for your attentive presence and engagement. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank
Pleasure, pleasure. Go well, hey? See you soon.
Bye.
Ciao,
Bye-bye.
ciao.